In today's episode, what we're going to be talking about is how different investments are taxed. I don't think that you can really be a good investor if you don't understand the different ways these investments are taxed, because the way that investments are taxed changes where those investments should be placed in various accounts. Taxes can eat away at your returns significantly when you don't plan well. Let's start with talking about how each investment is taxed. Let's start with stocks. Stocks are taxed in a couple ways. You have capital gains taxes, and then you also have dividends. Capital gains taxes come from selling a stock. You basically pay tax on the growth of an investment based on how long you hold it for. So if you hold this investment for less than a year, you're going to pay tax on that growth at your income tax rate. So this could be anywhere from 0, 10, 12, all the way to 37 plus state. And then if you hold an investment for greater than a year, you pay tax at long-term capital gains rates, which is 0, 15, or 20. And then if you make over $250,000, you also pay 3.8% net investment tax. This is important. You have the gain, right? That you have a taxable gain, you pay capital gains, but then you also have a loss. So with these, if you have a loss, then you can go use that loss to offset other gains. And then if you have any left over, you can offset $3,000 of your income, and then it carries forward for next year. This is something that people mix up all the time. They hear you can only offset $3,000 of income. Why would I tax loss harvest? But it's because they forget that you can offset other capital gains. So let's say you had $100,000 of capital losses, you could offset $100,000 of future capital gains. It's unlimited. It carries forward until you use them all. Super advantageous. And then, like I said, there's also dividends. Dividends are basically money that's paid out to you, the investor, from the company. They're basically like a forced sale of stock as the company loses value based on paying out that cash. Dividends can be taxed in two ways, either qualified or non-qualified. Qualified dividends are taxed at long-term capital gains rates. Non-qualified dividends are taxed at your income rates. To get qualified status, you typically need to hold the stock for at least a few months, but there are certain type of investments that everything is non-qualified, like REITs, which we'll talk about later. Let's move to bonds now. Bonds are basically for the more stable part of your portfolio. It's basically where you give money to a company, the government, etc., and then you're paid interest for the dollars you gave. And then at the end of the term, you're going to get the principal back at the end of the period. So you can have individual bonds you own. There's also bond funds, etc. The interest you receive each year is taxable depending on the type of bond it is. So corporate bonds are when you buy bonds from a company. All of the interest that you're getting paid back is taxed at your income rates. Treasury bonds, those are bonds from the federal government. Those are only taxed at the federal level, but they're not taxed at the state level. Now, muni bonds are typically like there's New York muni bonds, there's even city muni bonds, etc. They're fed and state tax exempt if you buy muni bonds in the state you live in. If you buy muni bonds not in the state you live in, then they're just federal tax exempt. Placing the right type of bonds in the right accounts makes a huge difference on taxes. Now let's go into ETFs. ETFs are basically buying like a basket of investments. Some examples are VOO, which is the S&P 500 ETF, or even BND, which is a bond ETF. Inside of these ETFs, you could have stocks, you could have bonds, a bunch of different things. And so they're going to be taxed similar to the underlying asset. If you hold an ETF for less than a year, you're going to pay income taxes. It's a short-term capital gain. If you hold for greater than a year, then you pay long-term capital gains. And also there's still net investment tax. And then dividends are taxed the same. So they could be qualified, they could be non-qualified. And then with a bond ETF, you're going to pay income tax on the interest paid if it's taxable. There's muni bond ETFs, treasury bond ETFs. So it definitely depends on the type. But then you're also going to pay short-term or long-term capital gains based on when you sell the ETF, based on the growth. And then inside of ETFs, there's also there's also mutual funds. So mutual funds and ETFs are very similar. It's just that ETFs trade during the day. Mutual funds, they don't trade during the day. And ETFs typically shelter gains more than mutual funds do. So typically mutual funds, you are seen way more in 401ks, etc. But most people in taxable accounts end up wanting to own ETFs because of the favorable tax treatment. So now let's move to crypto. Crypto is basically the same as stocks with just a slight tweak. Crypto, you pay capital gains taxes based on the time frame you hold an investment for. What ends up happening is that you either have short-term capital gains or long-term capital gains. And then there's this thing called staking, where basically you're paid interest for staking this crypto, and that's going to be taxed at your income rate. The one thing though that is different for crypto than stocks is that there's no wash sale rule. So with stocks, like let's say you have Apple, Apple's dropped and you want to sell it and get that tax loss, you can't rebuy back Apple for 31 days or it's disallowed. With crypto, you technically can sell and rebuy back because there's no wash sale rule, which is a pretty cool tax planning tool. You just need to make sure that the fees of selling and buying don't kind of take all of that away. The other thing that you need to know is a lot of people think that with crypto, you can basically exchange crypto without it being taxable or convert it. They think you can go from Bitcoin to ETH and that's not a taxable event because you converted it. This isn't true. The IRS says you had cash, you bought Bitcoin. You sold Bitcoin for cash, you use cash to buy ETH. So those are all taxable events inside of it. And you need to be aware of that. I've seen a lot of people not know this. And then all of a sudden they have these really massive tax bills because they thought a conversion wasn't a sale because it mechanically just goes from one to the other. You don't see it go to cash and you don't feel like that taxable event happened. Now let's go into REITs. So REITs are simply real estate investment trusts. REITs typically pay quite a bit of income, which is why people like investing in them. And the reason why is because when the REIT, you're typically buying leasing spaces or collecting rent on properties, things like that. And so due to all this income is taxed at your income rate. So no matter what on REITs, they're going to be non-qualified dividends. You're going to pay tax at your income rate. So they can be great. They're just super tax inefficient. So you typically don't want to own them in a taxable account. Lastly, let's talk about owning direct real estate. So this is like, hey, either I bought a property I own, or maybe, I bought, a fund or something like that with a few other people. And so how this works is you pay income tax on your profit. If there is a profit though, because depreciation is part of this. So depreciation happens, which helps offset some of that income. But the issue is that you're going to have depreciation recapture later, which is taxed at a higher rate. And then you also pay capital gains taxes based on the time frame you hold it for. So if it's held for greater than a year, you're going to pay capital gains, but you're still going to have some depreciation recapture. If it's less than a year, then you're obviously going to pay income taxes on it. The one thing that I do want to note though, if this is your own real estate you own that you live in, you can get a capital gains exclusion of $500,000 if you're married or $250,000 if you're single, as long as you live there 2 of the last 5 years. So if you live there 2 of the last 5 years, you're married and you sell for $450,000 of growth, then you don't pay any capital gains taxes on it. So you really need to be aware of this time frame part. This is something that people miss all the time. And it's also, a lot of people don't know about this, and then they turn their primary home in a rental. They don't realize, oh my gosh, now I'm going to miss out on that whole $500,000 of capital gains avoidance. Think about it. Let's say you're in the 20% capital gains bracket, not even talking net investment tax, not even talking state taxes. That's $100,000 of tax savings. It takes a lot to recoup that. So now that we're through all the investments, let's talk about the types of accounts and what goes best in them. So let's start with pre-tax. Pre-tax accounts allow you to invest funds on a pre-tax basis. So that means it reduces your taxable income today. Then the investments, there's no taxes on the investments and accounts. So if you have bonds and they're paying income, no tax. If you sell and you have a capital gain, no tax. And then you pay income tax on the entire amount when you take the funds out. Now, Roth accounts, dollars go in post-tax. You paid tax on these dollars, they go in, they grow tax-free. There's no tax on interest, no tax on capital gains, and then all that money can be taken out tax-free in the future. And then there's taxable accounts. You're putting in money post-tax. You pay capital gains, income tax, etc. on a yearly basis as any of those taxable events happen. And then you can take the money out whenever you want, and you only pay tax based on capital gains, interest, etc. Now let's put all this together and think through what investments make sense in which spot. Let's think about taxable bonds, REITs, or even investments that have a lot of non-qualified dividends. Since all of those are going to have a huge tax drag because you're paying income taxes on it, you typically want to put those in pre-tax accounts. If those are in a pre-tax account, you're not paying the income tax on it. Typically, when we're thinking about taxable bonds especially, those are going to grow the least. And you typically want your lowest growth assets in pre-tax. That's all going to come out at income tax rates in the future. You'd rather that part of your portfolio grow less, so you have less income tax hit in the future. Now, if we think about treasury bonds, we think about muni bonds, those go best in a taxable account. You typically wouldn't want to put tax favored bonds in a pre-tax account because it's taking away those tax benefits you already get. And a lot of times those come with slightly lower interest rates. And so this helps you get a better after-tax yield by avoiding that tax. Additionally, you'd also like ETFs and other tax efficient investments inside of your taxable account to minimize that tax drag. Investments with high dividend yields, especially if non-qualified, those can go pre-tax or Roth. Like REITs, typically people invest in them and they think a higher rate of return. This could be private credit, etc. Those are great in Roth if they're going to grow quite a bit and they have a high income tax hit because you get to avoid that income tax hit and you get the tax-free growth. And then lastly, You want your highest growth assets in Roth. Why? Because you never have to pay capital gains and all that money is coming out tax-free. So you want your Roth account to grow as much as possible for as long as possible. Tax inefficient things and low growth, pre-tax. Super high growth or very, high growth mixed with high income could be Roth. Most tax efficient, tax-free or less tax bonds, those go best in taxable. At the end of the day, to be a good investor, you need to understand how investments are taxed and then where to place those to minimize tax. Take a look at your portfolio and see if you're doing this well or see what changes you need to make. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and go follow my page for more personal finance content. And as always, if you have any thoughts, please leave it in the comments below, and I promise to get back to each individual comment. See you next week.